I went through a lot of burnout periods in my high school days, especially when I wasn't that smartest or hardest working student out there. But over the course of the past few years, I've been developing and tweaking with the study techniques that I've been using to eventually get a 99.95 ATAR. Even now at university, I've been changing this up even more, which means now that I'm able to keep up a 7 GPA while keeping up the lifestyle that I had in year 12. The funny thing is that this whole process is kind of not out of the ordinary, which just shows that no matter how you're currently finding school right now, in the next couple months to a year, you can also drastically improve your grades. Hey guys, Archie here, a second year medical student, and on this channel, we focus on being intentional with our time so we can spend it on the things and people that matter the most to us. Over these many years, my study systems have been completely adapting every single month to year. In fact, it's gone through so much change now that 90% of what I was doing back in year 12 is not what I do right now. Today, I want to show you a very close insight into the study systems that I had year by year and what changes happened through that. As I go through my journey, you might resonate or identify with some of the techniques that I might be going through, which shows, how I leveled up from the position that you might be in now to getting, these top 1% results. That said, I'll show you a little bit more about the final years that I had in high school and what I was doing in those years. And then we'll end off by sharing, my secrets that I have specifically been using to make all these changes, which is Kolb's Experiential Cycle and the law of marginal gains and how I've specifically used them. So the years before year 10, I was pretty much that stock standard student. In fact, I haven't told this to many people, but in primary school, I wasn't really getting the best grades. I had some A's, but I also had, various B's and C's. Once I reached year 8, I decided that I really wanted to get some better grades. So I tried harder. That kind of paid off a little bit by getting some more A's, and same in year 9. But then in year 10, I just found that I was studying a lot. So I had the stock standard study techniques as everyone else, doing practice tests, writing down my notes in my textbook, down the page, dot points, all these sort of things. I'd also reread my notes, rote learning. I knew really nothing. And essentially in year 10, every moment that I had outside of a commitment like sport or music, I basically would be studying, because in the previous years I had not got ducks, and then I decided that I wanted to get ducks in year 10. So I copied everything that my teacher would say, and I wouldn't look at my notes until, 1 week out from tests. And in these years, I kind of struggled a little bit with the exams and those tests because there wasn't really enough practice papers that I could depend on. Before year 10, I hadn't really topped many classes. By the end of it, I realized that I was putting so much effort and I was getting the grades, but not reflecting how much effort that I was putting in. Because it was just way too much. And so eventually by the end of year 10, after the exams, I was exhausted, I was burnt out, and I've never really shared this. I remember that I didn't really know what to do because I just finished my exams and now I had all this free time. So basically what happens is I just slept and slept and slept. And then I started going into this sort of thought process where I'm thinking, I really can't do much more than this in year 11 and year 12 when things actually start to matter. And because I was accelerating some subjects, year 11, I would already be doing some year 12 subjects. And in fact, I had a, whole year 12 workload along with year 11 coming up. So this was the stage where I found out about Ali Abdaal. And, the techniques that I learned there were really like game changing for me. I didn't realize, there was this whole world of study techniques out there. But this is kind of where it clicked for me in a way, because I realized that, I see these year 12s who are getting high ATARs, but they're still going to parties, still doing all of their other commitments, and they don't really look like they're studying that much. That was kind of inspiring for me to kind of achieve, which made me go down this kind of rabbit hole. Towards the end of year 10, I was really, really conscious that I needed to step up my game. This was my wake up call. And as much as it was like at least a week of just feeling really down in that period where I felt burnt out, that was the wake up call that told me, I have to focus on other things besides just putting more and more effort. And this is kind of the reason that I actually have this channel, because I wish I knew these things earlier before having to, fail in this kind of way. I ended up getting year 10 ducks, but it really, really didn't feel like it was worth it. So come to year 11, I've done all my research on Ali Abdaal and the study techniques that he's been talking about, active recall, spaced repetition, all of the books like Make It Stick, for example. These things were exponentially better than what I was doing before with the rote learning and not really even processing the information and having any aspect of active learning besides just application of the concepts through practice questions. So I hopped onto the Anki flashcard train and started using this app extensively. I also increased the number of practice exams that I was doing because there was just actually a lot more available. cycle. And this is that semi-effective technique that I've kept up until this day. However, the way in which I've used practice exams has changed completely. And really not knowing what I was doing, I changed from going from written textbooks to typing out all my notes. And so that meant that literally I was writing every word that my teacher was saying, because I do have a relatively fast typing speed. So I got sucked into this, and it was actually passive learning. And these changes themselves kind of reduced the amount of time that I was studying by like 20% quite quickly as well. Now by the end of the year, and in the test that I did, I still did quite well. And these techniques are definitely a great stepping stone to kind of get involved into this world of study techniques. And really, you need to be a master of active recall and spaced repetition to even understand any of the most recent study techniques that I talk about on this channel. However, in this period where I was using these techniques, honestly, there were so many times when things didn't work out. For example, I didn't really know if I was using Anki flashcards correctly. So, my grades would go up and down a little bit, but consistently they were still, high enough that I was happy about them. There were many cases where I missed out on that mark that I really needed, so I had to work even harder in a different way to catch up on that. Honestly, the things that I did in year 11 were really, really important for me to understand the things that I know now. But if I knew what I knew now, I would have done year 11 completely differently. And the same goes for year 12. There were so many limitations that I realized with using Anki, the flashcards, doing the Google Sheet method that I've kind of shared on this channel. These are my very early videos, but I just didn't know what else there was. So now we come to year 12, and in the holidays, I thought I should get an iPad like Ali Abdal. So I went a little bit back to starting to take my notes freehand again, writing them down on my iPad just because I really wanted to use it. Now this is a huge advantage again over the type, just because the fact that this is a lot more active in terms of your learning. You really have to actually understand the crux of what your teacher is saying to write it down on your notes. But to be honest, I didn't actually have any written notes during year 12. All of these were still typed onto the Google Sheet method that I had used instead of Anki. In year 11, I had around 3,000 flashcards just for year 12 biology that I was doing in that year. And that was ridiculous. So I couldn't do that again in year 12. Essentially what happened is I just got better with active recall and spaced repetition, and really ironed out some of the issues, because all of year 11, I was experimenting with these, with my grades and using these study techniques. Because really, I didn't know what I was doing, but this is what I had to do. Otherwise, I'd be studying ridiculous amounts like I did in year 10. So I started to look into some more study techniques so that I could continue developing, my knowledge around these things. So I looked at Einstein's thought experiment as a study technique, and I didn't even really realize until now that that's, a form of inquiry-based learning. And I also started to use things as well like Kolb's experiential learning cycle, which I was learning at the same time as doing the UCAT. This meant that I could reflect on everything that I was doing and see the real effectiveness of this and how I can, extract more of it out of all of these experiences. I also started to dabble into mind mapping, and not in the way that I kind of share now. Like, I really did not know mind mapping at the time, but I did find it useful in the revision process. However, now I realize that it's really important at all stages, when you're pre-studying, when you're actually learning it, when you're revising it, at all stages, it's actually really important. The video on mind mapping is coming soon, but I just want to make sure it's perfect. One of the things that was really underrated in year 12 for me was the use of brain dumps. Now, I've changed my technique again with those to make them much more effective, but that kind of involved me doing that mind map of all the information that I remembered for a test or an exam, and putting that onto one mind map. And then by the end of this, I got that 99.95 ATAR, and then some state ranks and other awards. Okay, so now we're in university and first year medicine, there's a lot more content. So again, not really knowing the extent of how far study techniques can go, I thought that active recall spaced repetition was the ceiling. I refined the system even more with the Google Sheets method and moved it over to Notion. It made it much cleaner, and you can watch that in my previous video. However, because there was so much more content, I was writing a lot more questions. And again, I realized that this was not going to be sustainable for me in the future years of medicine. And I knew in the back of my mind, I didn't want to be one of those medical students that studies for 6 to 7 hours a day, just doing their study. And completely, my dependence on practice exams was ripped apart from me, because in topics in university, there really isn't a lot of practice exams. And for most topics, there's actually 0. So for all of the exams that I just had, by the way, that I had 0 practice exams. So this caused me to think more like an examiner and create more of my own questions to really test what I didn't know. It obviously took longer to make, but this is so much more effective and builds that retention up, so I don't have to go relearn this later. And now coming to my second year of university, I've completely flipped my whole study system upside down. My system now is less focused on concepts and information, and now is focused on relationships because of how important I realize that is. So now I focus a lot more on an inquiry-based led system. So this uses my curiosity to learn in order to encode information into my long-term memory. And so the need for me to relearn content when there's just so much has gone down significantly. And in fact, for my exams, this semester, this is the least that I've studied probably since year 11. So the two most important things that have allowed me to reach this sort of progression is Kolb's experiential cycle and really using the law of marginal gains. So what is Kolb's? Well, as you can see, the first stage is about experience. Maybe that might be doing a practice question or trying out a new technique. The reflection stage with these study techniques is thinking about, okay, do I think it worked? Did it actually work? And what can I take away from this experience? So I go really deep into that sort of process, and then we can get to the abstraction stage. This is where you use your reflection to create new ideas, questions, and new hypotheses about what you want to try next. And then once you have that abstraction, you take it to the experimentation stage. This is where you then create that new experience, and this cycle continues and continues. Firstly, I did use this subconsciously because I was just knowing that I want to keep improving. However, knowing it subconsciously is not really enough. A lot of the things that you might hear on this channel might seem obvious to you, but knowing it is one thing, and knowing how to do it well is a completely other thing, and mastering it is just something completely else. The more that you can hone into using Kolb's experiential cycle, the easier that your growth can become exponential. I spent a lot less time focusing on inefficient study techniques because I saw this in that reflection process. And so slowly I could make that transition. So this all leads up to marginal gains, and this is so important. Marginal gains is about small incremental improvements all of the time, and this will begin to compound exponentially. So the reason that I've talked about Kolb's is because using that cycle allowed me to figure out, what's that next 1% that I can improve on. Whether that be improving my scheduling strategy so I'm 3% faster, or posing questions in a way that's gonna extract more learning out of it. Or it could be just as simple as prioritizing to sleep 20 to 30 more minutes a night. Each of these things on their own don't make that much of a difference, but if you keep doing these things, they really do add up. Trying to obtain these marginal gains daily is what allows my study system to keep developing. Because honestly, if I don't do this, then I'm gonna fall behind, because the challenge, with medicine is always getting harder as I go through and through, and the same is for, pretty much any student. The challenge is always getting harder, so you need to be doing more to keep up. And to keep ahead, you have to be doing even more. So it's not in terms of time that you do more, but what you actually do with that time. Okay, so that's my journey up until now. Hopefully you can figure out where you might be at right now, maybe resonating with some of these things, and then you can figure out what the next steps and marginal gains are for yourself. You might not see this difference overnight, but it all starts with, tomorrow. If you can really stick to these things, then honestly, the difference is going to be clear as day and night. And now it's all up to you.